Have you ever been listening to a band and thought to yourself, how did these guys get so big? Well, a lot of them actually came out swinging and they made a record so awesome that it made them famous virtually overnight. And some of them, well, they made great records, but it took them a while to actually get noticed. But that's music business for you. The fact that you're awesome does not equal to a lot of sales, and a lot of sales usually don't equal to greatness. So hello everybody and welcome to a new video and welcome to my channel where we talk about everything music from death metal to Queen and everything in between. On today's video, we're going to talk about 15 awesome debut albums by classic rock bands that are huge. And in case you make it down to 15 albums and you think of an album that should have been on this list, check out these other two videos here. I'll link to them in the description down below because that album could be on the hard rock and heavy metal list or the extreme metal list. But in case you think of an album that should have made this list or any of those lists and it hasn't been listed yet, please drop me a comment in the comment section down below and let me know because I'm sure I'm going to make a part 2 of all of these. Anyway, so let's get started. For this 15, just like on the other two videos, I am actually going to go in chronological order. That way I don't have to think about ranking them. It's just going to be chronological from the oldest to the newest. Also, mind you, I'm going to try to be objective and there's going to be a lot of bands I'm not necessarily a fan of or even care about. So just like on the previous videos, I don't necessarily like all of the bands on this list. Alright, so let's get started at the beginning. First off, we have from 1963, the Beatles with Please Please Me, their debut album. The Beatles' debut album was so popular and so huge that it actually lasted in the UK's top 10 charts for over a year. And out of that year, 30 weeks it stayed at number 1, right up until the release of their next album with the Beatles, which took over the number 1 spot from the Beatles. Which is ridiculous. I mean, they had 2 number 1s in a row, and it took the Beatles putting out a second album for them to actually fall off the number 1 spot on that list. That's amazing. Not a fan of the Beatles, but credit where credit is due. And even though I'm not a fan, a lot of the songs are very popular still to this day. I mean, I am sure you've heard Love Me Do and I Saw Her Standing There and of course Twist and Shout. Big hits, huge hits. Number 2 on this list, the man that single-handedly changed guitar playing forever. From 1967, we have Are You Experienced by Jimi Hendrix. This one only lasted 33 weeks in the UK's top 10. So yeah, not as huge as the Beatles, but definitely just as influential for music. Now, researching for this video, I actually found out that there were 2 very different releases for this album, one in the UK and one in the US. The one I'm most familiar with is the one in the US, so I'm going to talk about that one. And boy, did it have some hits. Hey Joe, Foxy Lady, The Wind Cries Mary, and of course, Purple Haze. They're all on this debut album. That's almost like a Jimi Hendrix greatest hits album on its own. Moving right along, from the same year, 1967, we have the self-titled album by The Doors called The Doors. This one had a lot of jazz and classical influences that drove the critics crazy. They didn't know whether they liked it or hated it. This one shot up all the way up to number 2 in the US, second only to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Again, just like Jimmy's album, this is like a greatest hits. Break On Through, The End, and Light My Fire are all on this one album. Now, number 4 on this list, one of my favorite albums from this whole list, 1969's In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. An amazing album that just went over most people's heads. Number 5 in the UK and number 28 in the US billboards. It has 5 songs and it's killer from start to finish. I've actually already talked about this album on a previous video. My favorite songs on this album are Epitaph, I Talk to the Wind, and the title track, The Court of the Crimson King. Just do me a quick favor, if you're enjoying this list so far, please drop me a comment in the comment section down below. Just hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to this channel like a man if you haven't yet. And if you really want to help contribute to the channel, please consider becoming a patron. A little goes a long way. We surely do appreciate it. Now, number 5 on this list, and I'm sure you guys were expecting this, from the same year, 1969, Led Zeppelin's debut album and self-titled album, Led Zeppelin. Number 6 in the UK and number 10 in the US. It actually did great. Led Zeppelin actually became a band by chance. The story of this is actually pretty interesting. Jimmy Page was actually in a band called the Yardbirds, and they had this tour coming up in Scandinavia that they had committed to before they split up. And then they decided to split up, and Jimmy Page took it upon himself to actually fulfill that previous commitment. So he basically just put together a group of session musicians just so that they could do that tour and get it over with. But apparently, the chemistry between Jimmy Page and Robert Plant became really apparent very quickly. So they decided to get together and record this album. Again, loaded with hits. Good Times, Bad Times, Communication Breakdown, Dazed and Confused, and Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. All hits, all on the debut album. crazy. Now, in 1973, we have an album that was rushed, that was really hard to record, and which sales met no expectations at all. Ranking at 32 on the UK and 83 in the US, Queen's self-titled album was a flop. For sure, my favorite album on this list, because, you know, Queen is my favorite band of all time. It was very influential and it has a lot of great tracks, but not without its problems. After a lot of back and forth, Trident Studios actually signed Queen to a recording contract, but limited to studio downtime only, which means that they could only use the studio when nobody else was using it. So let's say somebody paid for an 8-hour session and they only used up 5 and left. Queen would have 3 hours to set up and start recording. So yeah, it was kind of harsh. It was definitely rushed, and it shows. I mean, one of the songs, Matt the Swine, didn't even make the cut. It only showed up years later on a 1992 Hollywood Records re-release, remastered and remixed. It was also a B-side to one of the Innuendo singles. So yeah, it took all of that work almost 20 years later for it to actually show up. So yeah, the only 2 songs to actually make some sort of an impact in the music business back then were the singles Keep Yourself Alive and Liar. If you want to know more about this album, I'll leave a link in the description box below where I review the whole thing. Coming in on number 7 from the same year, 1973, another album that is number 1 in our hearts, because we love this album, but it just 27 in the US, which is not bad, but it didn't even rank in the UK. This album has Gimme 3 Steps, Tuesday's Gone, Simple Man, and Freebird. And I know you guys know who I'm talking about. And of course, this is Lynyrd Skynyrd, pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. Another great album, a fan favorite. And you know, one of the first albums to actually blend country music and hard rock and classic rock. So we've got Gimme 3 Steps, which is a fairly known song. Tuesday's Gone, which was covered by Metallica, but you know, it was famous on its own right, and then it grew again. You know, it's been featured in many movies and stuff like that. You know, one of my favorites is Happy Gilmore. That was hilarious. That was an awesome movie. Then we have Simple Man, which almost didn't get recorded. The producer or the engineer, I forget, didn't want to record it because he felt like it was kind of bland and just like meh. So he got escorted out to the car while the band recorded the song. And I'm happy they did, because it's one of my favorite songs by Lynyrd Skynyrd. And of course, Freebird. I mean, did I say any more? Number 8 on this list, Bad Company by Bad Company from 1974. Another amazing album. It hit number 3 in the UK charts and number 1 in the US. And it was the first record to ever be released out of Swan Song, Led Zeppelin's record label. Definitely a supergroup. You had the singer and the bass player from Free, the guitar player from Mott the Hoople, and the drummer from King Crimson. And then as far as the songs go, we have I Can't Get Enough of Your Love, Bad Company, of course, the title track, which is one of my favorites, the Mott the Hoople Ready for Love cover, and 2 very underrated songs, The Way I Choose and Seagull, which are probably my favorite songs on the album. I mean, I love Paul Rodgers' voice, and I really wish they would have kept him in Queen as opposed to Adam Lambert. But yeah, now my call. On with the show. From 1974, we have Kiss's debut album, self-titled Kiss. Ranked 87 in the US and failing to rank in the UK, this album has some classic Kiss songs. Most of them actually became popular after the Alive album came out. You have Cold Gin, Nothing to Lose, Strutter, Firehouse, 100,000 Years, and one of my favorite Kiss songs, Black Diamond. Something worth mentioning is the fact that Kissing Time, the song, was not included in the original release of this album, but the label actually felt that a more commercial song would actually benefit sales and help drive sales of that album, which it did. So they went in the studio 2 months after the album was released and recorded Kissing Time, which was added to every subsequent release of that album ever since 1974. For 1976, we have Boston's debut album, also self-titled Boston. Number 3 in the US and 11 in the UK. Really good numbers. It was the fastest selling debut album by any American band. To think that shows the founding member of the band actually almost quit the music business is crazy. He was 29 at the time and he was working at a Polaroid store when the album came out. He was so sad and discouraged and distressed that even after the album came out and he had really decent sales, he still kept working at the Polaroid store just in case, because he felt like it was gonna dip at any time or another. That's nuts. Especially considering the fact that even to this day, all of the songs on that album still get decent radio play. But of course, Side A is the most popular part of this album. More Than a Feeling, Peace of Mind, and Foreplay Long Time get played constantly on classic rock stations to this day. Number 11 from the same year, 1976, we have Dreamboat Annie by heart. Now this might come as a surprise to you guys, but I love this album. Number 7 in the US, number 36 in the UK. It actually had some really decent sales, especially considering the fact that the band is from Canada. You've got very popular songs like Magic Man and Crazy on You, but you also have the title track, which is Dreamboat Annie, which is actually 3 songs, and it's slightly different versions of the same song really. Of course, you also have How Deep It Goes, and my personal favorites, Love Me Like Music and Soul of the Sea. Awesome album. Now in 1978, we go all the way back to the UK with Dire Straits' debut album, self-titled Dire Straits. Number 2 in the US and number 5 in the UK with the single Sultans of Swing taking over and just making this album an instant hit. Mark Knopfler positioning himself as, an up-and-coming guitar hero with a very distinctive sound, with a finger-style guitar playing and, the very clean-sounding Strat. He took everybody by surprise. Now the other single from the album, Water of Love, didn't do all that well, but the album became a classic nevertheless. And the opening track, Down to the Waterline, actually became a fan favorite over the years. Now from 1978, another one of those albums that is number 1 in our hearts. Yet another self-titled album. This one is Molly Hatchet's Molly Hatchet. Number 64 in the US, it failed to rank anywhere else. Another awesome blend of country and hard rock, dubbed Southern Rock. This album is a staple of the genre. You have the hits Bounty Hunter, Gator Country, and Dreams I'll Never See, which is a cover of the Allman Brothers song Dreams. You had 3 lead guitar players and an amazing vocalist whose first line ever to be recorded on the whole discography was Hell Yeah. I mean, what a way to start out a discography. And get a lot of the album cover. I actually purchased my first Molly Hatchet album because I thought they were gonna be metal as f***. And it ended up not being metal as f***, but they were awesome regardless. So yeah, I was actually surprised, but I am glad I was. Now for the last 2, I'm actually going to jump ahead in time and I'm going to go all the way up to 1991 with Pearl Jam's first album, 10. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. Number 2 in the US, number 18 in the UK, these guys kicked ass. Considered to be the quintessential grunge album, it actually sounds to me more like classic rock with a lot of hard rock influences, especially if you compare it to the other grunge bands. Now, as far as the songs go, everybody knows the songs. Once, Even Flow, Alive, Why Go, Black, Jeremy. I mean, we've all heard these songs many times. Definitely a highly influential album. Take it or leave it, it's a great debut album. Now, last but not least, this was actually a tough choice, but I'm gonna go with Stone Temple Pilots' Core from 1992. Kind of in between Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, this album is heavy, it's catchy, and it did very well in sales. Number 3 in the US, number 27 in the UK. I was actually leaning towards Dirt by Alice in Chains, but it didn't get nearly as good numbers as this album did. I mean, you've got Dead and Bloated, Creep, Cracker Man, of course, Sex Type Thing, and the most famous out of all of them, Plush, which is a huge hit. This album is very musical, it sounds great, it was well recorded, the arrangements are great. It's just a great debut album. And if you don't agree, leave me a comment in the comment section down below and let me know. Or check out these videos, you might find what you're looking for there.